everyone. Welcome to the most awkward episode of What's the Tea? My name is Laura Martin. I am the Executive Director of the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada. And What's the Tea is where we talk about what's going on in Nevada, Nevada government, and with local Nevadans. And I'm here today with a very inspiring guest, Plan's own IRA Coordinator, Liz Becker. And we are going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and solarization of our public schools. So welcome, Liz. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I am doing great. I love the introduction to this show and the whistle sound. And I also think that you are a very inspiring person. So this is going to be a fun time.
Yay. So let's get the first question out of the way. What is the Inflation Reduction Act? For folks who may be asking, who the heck is IRA?
That is a very common question because people do not know. And in our world, we use a lot of acronyms. And if you say IRA, it's just like people's eyes glass over. They do not know what you're talking about. It stands for Inflation Reduction Act. And it was passed in 2022. And this was a piece of legislation that was central to President Biden's agenda. And it was intended to be a bipartisan piece of legislation. And it ended up passing along party lines, but it was kind of paired with the infrastructure law. And so there are pots of money in the Inflation Reduction Act that can be used also along with the infrastructure law money. And it's aimed at making sure that we have a just transition away from fossil fuels. And so there are many, many different parts. It's hundreds of billions of dollars in funding. And it is aimed at making sure that in the past we have subsidized fossil fuels, but these are basically subsidies for renewable energy and making sure that regular folks can access technologies that in the past have only been accessible to big businesses or to people with a lot of money, for instance, solar panels. In the past, that's only been available to people who could pay for themselves out of pocket. So Nevada and Wyoming are the two biggest users of the Inflation Reduction Act per capita. And here at Plan, I've been working on this for almost a year, and it took me months to understand this law. I definitely do not completely understand it, but there's a reason that regular people don't know what is in this law because it's complicated. But at the end of the day, the biggest part of this law is Justice 40 and making sure that this money, 40% of the money in the Inflation Reduction Act goes to our communities and to people that have been historically locked out because of redlining, because of inequities in how people have capital in their own households. And so this was long fought for. People that are in the environmental world have been wanting something like this for decades, really, and now we have it. And, now we have to fight to keep it.
Yeah, definitely. And that was going to be my next question because you said it was a Biden error, one of his signature pieces of legislation. So how is the Trump administration undermining these efforts?
Yeah, so I'm sure that most folks who follow what's going on in this administration know that during the first week of the presidency, so many executive orders were issued. And a lot of those executive orders were focused on energy production and also focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And because the Inflation Reduction Act was specifically targeted towards communities that have historically not had this investment, those parts of the law are being targeted by that diversity, equity, inclusion executive order saying we don't care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the energy executive orders are basically making the point that he wants to completely turn away from the idea that we need to get rid of fossil fuels. So this administration wants to be technology neutral, they say, and let the market decide which technologies lead. But in reality, this administration is funded by fossil fuel companies. And so they want to make sure that fossil fuel companies continue making money. And if we do the things the Inflation Reduction Act wants us to do or leads us to do, it will make them make less money. So they're really trying to juice those other industries and make sure that wind, solar, geothermal do not have any competitive advantage. They see this as a competitive advantage given to them.
Wow. So one of the questions is, what can the IRA do for our communities? And that's a project that you've really been working on, and that's the solarization of our schools. Can you tell us a little bit about, what is that about?
Yes. So something that people may have heard of is our Solar for All program. That is also money from the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we have a clean energy fund, basically a green bank that can help folks access solar power. And that fund does work with a lot of our school districts, and they can stack money and they can loan money to schools to put on solar. And in addition, schools can also apply for something called direct pay, which is one of the tax credits that's part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And you may be thinking to yourself, tax credits, schools don't pay taxes. And that is correct. The direct pay program is targeted at nonprofits who do not have a tax burden. So that would be schools, houses of worship, municipalities, and nonprofits that own their own buildings. And those organizations have never before tried to get a tax credit because they don't pay taxes. So really what they're going to get at the end is a check. And that check is going to reimburse them for renewable energy projects that they install on site. So we're really focused on schools because schools are taxpayer funded. So everything that schools do is using our money. And if schools can save money on their utility bills, that is saving taxpayer money, which feeds into this administration's goal of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. So we want to make sure that people understand this is saving public money by putting on renewable energy that lowers utility bills. But what happens is most money that goes to schools in the past has been through a grant. So somebody in a grant writing department would have to write usually a very complicated grant and explain how they're going to use the money. But in direct pay, the schools install renewable energy. And then at the end of that process, once it comes online and is providing power, then the school fills out one IRS form and then a check comes in the mail to that school. Seattle School District finished a giant project last year and received a $7 million check from the IRS to repay them for ground source heat pumps. Washoe County School District is also installing ground source heat pumps. And here in Clark County School District, we are already installing solar on all of our new schools. And the schools that were built between 2022 and halfway through 2024 are eligible for the first round of the direct pay money. And that is what we've been working on, trying to make sure they get that money.
It's a lot. It's a lot of work, but it is definitely worth it. And so where are we at currently, and what are the federal updates and how can we save the IRA?
Oof. So many federal updates. So for those of you involved in this movement with us, you probably felt that giant shift when we moved into a new administration. We thought at the end of last year that we would be spending this year rapidly expanding who had access to this money. And now we're in the fight to just save these tax credits and the majority of the IRA. So at the federal level, there is a process called budget reconciliation that the people in power are using right now so that they can go around the filibuster. They do not want the Senate to have 60 votes. So the only way to do that is to pass a budget through budget reconciliation, which is a fancy way of saying you need half the people to vote for it. And, that's normally how people view laws, but the Senate has crazy rules. So now only 50 senators are going to have to pass the budget. And then if it came out to a tie, the vice president would pass a vote. But in the House, the party in power only has 3 seats that they can avoid, that they can lose and still pass a bill. So we're focused on the folks who have said, I want these tax credits in my district. And in Nevada, we have one of those people, and it is Mark Amadei in CD2. And Congressional District 2 is basically all of Northern Nevada, everything above Tonopah. And in his district, there are many, many projects that applied for funding through the IRA. And Washoe County School District, like I mentioned, is doing a lot of work on ground source heat pumps and then getting this money back. Hopefully, they haven't gotten their first check yet, but it's coming in the next few days, hopefully. And so one project is supposed to be getting $1.7 million back for that school district. And his whole district has gotten about $6.6 billion of money from the IRA. And those are jobs for our people. And a lot of that money is going to large solar projects, battery recycling, charging stations, all different kinds of things that are funded through the IRA. And the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe and other tribes in the state also have access to a different pot of money in the IRA, and they have used that. And so our goal is to pressure these people like Representative Amadei and make sure that they're hearing these stories about how this money is being used and why it's good for the district, so that when that budget bill comes up, he will not sign something that cuts this money out.
Wow. That's a lot. And sometimes I think they make the process so convoluted that you almost don't want to pay attention to it. But I'm glad that you are, and also providing this intel to all of our partners at the Nevada Environmental Justice Coalition, because it's important for us to keep up with this. But another question that people may have is, does CCSD even need this? Like, did you just have an idea one day and just forcing it, or do they really need this?
Yeah, so a number that I found out at the beginning of doing research for this is 120 million. That is how much money CCSD spends on average per year on utilities. $120 million. They operate about 374 schools, and some of those schools have a monthly bill in the tens of thousands of dollars for energy. And not all of that money is going for electricity, but the majority of that 120 million goes towards electricity. And so that is transferring our tax dollars directly to NV Energy. It's saying we're paying for our schools to run, and this is how much energy they're using. So we're just going to shift that money over. And we live in a place where every single school could have solar on the roof and or on parking lot solar that would cover parking spaces in the parking lot. And like I said, the district is installing solar on all of their new schools, but there are hundreds and hundreds of schools that were built in the 90s and the 2000s after 1985, basically, that could have solar on their roofs without having to do a major upgrade on the school. And so that's the pressure that we've been putting on the district when we're having conversations with folks inside the school district. And we're trying to raise awareness with the trustees as well, because our school district trustees obviously have a lot on their plate. They're seeing a lot of numbers come across their desk. They're always having to approve, different pots of money that go toward capital improvements or teacher pay, things like that. And the big message is, stop for just a second and think about a future in which we weren't spending $120 million on utilities. What if we cut that in half? What could you do with $60 million a year? Whose pay could you increase? What maintenance projects that you have deferred could you be doing so that our kids aren't sitting in classrooms that are 85 degrees? What reading specialist or guidance counselor could you add to specific schools that really need that position and don't have the money for it? So that is what I'm really focused on, because it isn't good enough to just go along with what you're already planning to do in an environment where you know that isn't good enough. And the district last year got hit really hard with all these news stories about, air conditioners not working. And that's going to continue if we don't find a way to get money in the budget to fix those things. And this is a great way to do that. If the government is going to reimburse you for work that you already are going to do, you can then take that reimbursement money and you can roll it into more projects. And then every single year you'll save, more and more on your utility bill. And then eventually you could be producing all your own power. And if the district produced all of their own power, they wouldn't have a utility bill.
Yes. So we're home to the fifth largest school district in the country. Are they on board, or do we need to get them on board?
Yeah. So when I joined at Plan last year, I started figuring out who to meet with. And anyone who's tried to contact the school district might know it's difficult to get meetings sometimes if you don't already know someone. And I happen to know the person who used to be the chief of facilities. Um, just I personally knew this person. So I contacted him. His name is Mark Campbell, wonderful human. And he let me know that this is something the school district was interested in. And they had spent time and effort planning where they could put solar in the district. And then with all of the craziness that happened with the superintendent, just lots of people started losing their jobs, and they were replaced with people that the prior superintendent put in positions, and they didn't necessarily know what should be done, or they didn't continue that process. So there was a lot of chaos. And now, we have a new superintendent, we have people on the school board that seem to be interested in not causing chaos and seem to be interested in saving money for the district. And we've been having great conversations with folks inside the school district and raising this at board meetings. And one thing I really want to see is I want the school district trustees to get a presentation about how much energy does the district use, how many schools already have solar, how much energy are they currently producing, and what is the projection of what they could produce, so that the community can see the benefit that this would have to put solar on all the schools. So they are in the process of pursuing money for 2 schools that are in the eligible time period. And then there's 2 more schools who came online after July 1st of last year, which means they have to apply for the next fiscal year. So May 15th of this month, so 1 week approximately, is when they have to get that paperwork in. And they've gotten through their first step. They pre-filed, which is something you have to do with the IRS. And now they just have to turn in their form, and then they should be getting a check for those first 2 schools. And then for the next 2 schools, they'll have to complete that process by November the 15th of this year. And then any other schools that have projects ongoing as they finish, that's when they can apply. And that's why it's crucial that we keep this funding, because funding from the IRA is supposed to last until 2032. And the goal of this administration is to water it down as much as possible or get rid of it entirely. And if they do that, all these different companies and school districts that have been counting on this and building it into their budget are going to be at a loss and not be able to complete projects that were already in the pipeline.
That's wild. It's just so much bureaucracy to do what seems like common sense, paying $120 million in utilities versus investing in school psychologists, school social workers, more teachers, raises in teachers' pay. I mean, these are fights that are going on in the legislature right now. And it seems like if we had only gotten started earlier, we could be on top of this. I know if you fly into Las Vegas, you fly over a bunch of schools, and what do you see? Football fields. Like, it would be great to see solar panels on top of all these schools.
Yeah, I want to plug one particular school because it's like the perfect example of what could be. Most people are probably familiar with our magnet program. We have a very strong magnet program in Clark County School District, and we've got career and technical academies that are training students to go into the fields where they could get hired at union pay levels, which would be, game changing for them. And Northeast Career and Technical Academy just opened 2 years ago, and its roof is covered in solar panels. And they have students there that are learning how to install solar and how to work on it, so that once they graduate high school, they can go straight into an apprenticeship program. And then they can have a job, straight out of high school, which is just what we need in our society, because we want to prepare students for jobs of the future. We don't want to continue to prepare students for things that aren't going to exist, 10 years after they graduate high school. But we know that solar installation and maintenance is going to exist far into the future, as well as all the other green energy technologies.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Liz, it's been great chatting with you on What's the Tea. I know people learned a lot because even though obviously I hear about you talk about your work all the time, I still learn something every time you do bring it up. And I also want to lift up, I mean, we didn't just pluck you out of obscurity. You are a professor, you've worked for a utility company before. And so I think that's the expertise that you really bring to this and I really appreciate. I don't know if you want to expand on any of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I moved here in 2004 and went to UNLV and got my degree in environmental science. And they actually don't have that degree program anymore. But CSN has that degree program. And right before I came to Plan, that's where I was. I was at CSN teaching environmental policy. And one of the reasons I decided to apply for this position at Plan is when you teach policy, you feel like you're kind of stuck in the past because you need to make sure your students understand the history of environmental policy. But I knew that Plan was going to be on the cutting edge of shaping policy into the future. And a lot of my students at CSN were really interested in getting into that world and not just, sitting back and being like, yeah, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act are great. They did their job. That isn't how policy for the environment works. We can constantly make things better. And I've just really loved doing this work here and getting to organize in the community. There's so many folks who know just so many different things. And this community is unique, I feel like. It's like a small town living in Vegas, but it's big, and you can have a big impact. Like you said, fifth largest school district in the country. If they did solar on every single school, it would make a huge impact.
Huge impact, especially as our community especially keeps heating up. I mean, I know it's cool now because it's been raining, but it's gonna get in the mid 90s this weekend, and it's only gonna go up from there. And so, when I moved to Vegas, there used to be year-round school, and I know they cut it back because they couldn't afford to keep the ACs running in July and August. And so those are some of the things that we lose when we're not prepared for the energy that it takes to keep schools manageable in the heat.
Yeah, they were talking about that. So there's a master plan going on right now at CCSD. And so a couple weeks ago, they had all these community meetings where folks could go and talk about, what's important to you 10 or 20 years down the road in CCSD. What are your priorities? And they talked about that. They talked about how year-round school was really kind of put into place because there were too many students per school, and they needed like a third or a fourth of the students to not be in school at a certain time. But they found that they were using so much more energy because they were running full classrooms all year long. So one of the reasons they got rid of it is because of, the increasing heat.
Yes, I'm sure certain students were happy about that, but I think year-round school is probably actually a good idea. But yes, but again, thank you, Liz. It's been great having you on What's the Tea. I know that we will have you back. Before I let you go, I want to talk about some upcoming actions people can take. And so we have our legislative action meeting on May 28th. It'll be our last one as the legislative session ends in June, maybe, unless there's a special session. We have that's virtual and in person in Las Vegas. There's a Public Utilities Commission consumer session. Our friends at Envy Energy want to raise our rates 9%, as if it's not high enough. And they want to increase the amount of money they can pay to their shareholders, which is so greedy. And that meeting is on June 4th. And then on June 15th, or excuse me, on May 15th, this isn't really a big action to take, but something just to be aware of, that there is a school board meeting. And so, Liz, you're doing a great job monitoring the school board meetings. And this is the next one, and that'll be May 15th.
Yep. And they do have an agenda item on replacing a lot of the HVAC equipment because so much of it was broken at the beginning of the school year last year, and they're doing a big push. So here's to hoping they get all that done before August 11th.
Cool. Well, thank you again. And that is it for this episode of What's the Tea?
Thanks, Laura.
Yay.